And basically they'd be running up that staircase to try and get up here, because from here up is all the piece de resistance, the creme de la creme. This is where the king, and this is where the earl and the noble one who ruled this land would live here. Peasants were not allowed up here unless they were in the service of the king. If they were found roaming around here, looking around, they could find themselves in the dungeon waiting to be killed, because they could be construed as assassins. That's how paranoid the individuals were. Here we have the four towers. Up on this tower here, the earl, his children, his wife slept. He slept over the other side in a separate chamber. He'd have his own private chapel. The family would have their chaplain's quarter, or their chapel here, and basically his food was cooked in here, his wine and all was cooked here. This is where every single monarch in Europe basically would have something like this in their castles or palaces. It's a thing called court. Court is where the formal arrival of any dignitaries from Rome or from any other country, if you are basically coming to a land, especially, let's say for instance King Henry VIII, if anybody coming from France or Germany and so on were actually coming to introduce themselves, it would be here in this court, in this throne room here, that the king would actually welcome them. He would invite all his nobles to court. Court could happen every single day for 6 or 7 hours, and as many weeks as well, all the weeks of the month. It was always at the king's basically behest. He might like court, he might want it, he might feel in a bad humour, and every single thing to do with the monarchy was all down to the king's humour. He would sit in his high back throne here. The high back throne, as I mentioned before, was to prevent anybody from stabbing him in the back. This small chair here was not for his wife, it's for his scribe who took note of all the proceedings here. Because not only was it basically here that any disputes over land, but treacherous behaviour or inappropriate behaviour was basically brought here. Because above everybody else, above the human side of everybody, you had titles, and your titles gave you a responsibility. All the gentlemen up here in this room would be given titles, lands and power, and they would actually have a lot of armies as well. They would have to do one thing to the king, and that's swear allegiance 24 hours a day for the rest of your natural life. He could call on you at 2 in the morning to come to his side, to talk to him about, basically just to listen to his ravings as a monarch, and you could not open your mouth until you're spoken to. If you came to him with a scowl on your face, you could find yourself out of favour with court and banished from court. And this is where we get our phrase, out of sight, out of mind. If you're out of court, you basically might find yourself on the hangman's noose, or the block, whatever was basically, because you were out of favour. Now, could you trust the other peers? No, you couldn't. Because every one of them wanted to get your land, your titles, your power, and he would actually try and get little words into the king's ears to find out exactly what was going on and so on. And this became like their prisons, because the palaces of Europe, all the beautiful palaces in every single country that we know today in Europe, had palaces, had kings, and they all became a little bit gaga for many reasons, a little bit insane in their approach. One, because they never left them. What would happen if you stayed in a room, one household for the rest of your life without going out? They couldn't go out. How could they? Where would they go? If they went out hunting, they'd have to have a huge entourage of people to take them out hunting for fear that somebody might try and kill them. Now, as well as that, the king would entertain here. He would have massive banquets here. The fire would be lighted here going up to the ceiling. The windows had no glass in them, remember? So the tapestries were taken down and put across the windows to block out the wind and the rain. We are over 100 feet up in the air at the moment, and the Atlantic Ocean would actually be sweeping in here through those windows as well. As well, all the food would be cooked in the king's kitchen here, as I said, and basically all the carcasses would be cooked here as well. One of the most important, basically, traditions of any monarchy and any court was the presentation of the food. It would actually be done in a very elaborate way. All of the lovely food would be displayed in a procession all the way around, all of the people sitting to make it look very, very impressive indeed. The tapestries on the walls are French and Flemish for the 15th and 16th century. This one here is exquisite. It took 3 years to restore back to its former glory. All these tapestries are of kings of old and emperors of old. King David from the Bible, the Emperor Charlemagne, and welcome back to court, and the Emperor Charlemagne's 9 great heroes battles, all his famous victories and so on. These were used as educational pieces to educate the noble children. Most people of the realm could not read or write until the late 15th century. The Gutenberg press basically gave people the ability to read books that no longer were only used by the monarchies and by the kings and queens of old and so on. These tapestries are quite exquisite, as I said. Now, above them we have one of the only hot pieces that is from Ireland. It's great Irish deer and great Irish elk, the antlers thereof. They were found in a place called Lochgur in County Limerick, 20 miles from here, 60 years ago. And they were found in a peat bog. Now a peat bog is where we get this from. This is turf. This is a very thick soil that basically has very little oxygen in it. And anything that falls into peat is preserved because of that. We take it out, we wet it, and we dry it, and it turns into this after about 3 weeks. And we burn this as a substitute for coal and for wood. And we still burn this today. However, these were found in that, in the peat bog. They have been carbon dated between 10 and 12,000 years old. One of the oldest pieces found from a historical prehistoric basis. They are basically huge. They would have stood 21 feet as a maximum height. And basically, just to give you some idea, the statue of St. George the Dragon is 17 feet tall. The bodies of which were found with the antlers, and the bodies were sent up to the National Museum in Dublin, where they are on display today. And they are quite massive. So they would have basically roamed this land here, where we're standing here, 12,000 years ago. 7,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt were even thought about. These beasts roamed the age. They would have been the same height and width as the mammoths of old. The mammoths from a prehistoric time. So they're quite exceptional. The span of the antlers is 11 feet across, which makes them quite an exceptional beast altogether. Ladies and gentlemen, all pieces of furniture you see in this room all basically come apart. They're all basically come apart so they can bring them up the staircase. Some of them are so large they have to come up through the windows and so on. And that's because there was no glass in the windows, that was very easily done. Now, they were put together again by dowels and pegs. There was no such things as screws or hinges and so on in those times. But they're put together so well that you can hardly see the seams of how they fit together. They're so beautiful in their designs. There are only cupboards and so on. This is exquisite. It's a dower chest from the 15th century. It was given to a young lady on the day of her wedding by her father, and it has some lovely biblical scenes, the Last Supper, the Crucifixion, the Immaculate Conception, the Nativity, and so on, surrounded by symbols of fertility. For it was very important for young ladies and young men to be fertile, because the only way a title or power could be transferred to one member of your family was a true bloodline, a male true bloodline. Your son was the only one who could inherit your titles. Your daughter wouldn't. She would be married very young. She would be married at 12 or 13 years old to a family, to form an alliance with them. Her main duty was to have 10 or 12 children, in the hope that 3 or 4 were male, in the hope that 1 or 2 survived into their teenage years, because death of family members, especially teenage children and so on, was very, very high. The average age for women when they died was 25 to 30 years old. They usually died of childbirth issues. Because remember, in the medieval times, there was no such thing as antibiotics, or doctors, or hospitals. Cleanliness was not next to godliness in those times. Most people washed once a year. Women washed 4 times a year. So if there was any disease, and by God, there was a lot of disease around that time, it went through the whole community, sometimes the whole country. And in one case, the bubonic plague of the 13th century went from China to Ireland, and every country in between. It was the worst plague that ever hit the earth. 200 million people, a third of the population of the world, were killed in that plague. And here's a little story. Now, I did research it to make sure it was true. In the early 13th century, a pope decided that cats were the spawn of the devil. And he sent a decree across Christendom in the late 12th century that all cats would be killed. And they killed a lot of cats, close to about 25 million cats across Europe. And what happens when you kill cats? The rat population exploded. And it exploded in the 13th century to the degree that rats basically, they were the ones that carried the bubonic plague that went across Europe, which is now, talk about a twist of fate in our world and so on. It was one of the worst diseases ever to hit our world and such. Would you believe the one nearest to our time was in 1918? 1918, the Spanish flu killed more people than the First World War put together, and all the battles thereof and so on. So it was quite horrendous, all these plagues and so on. So, on top of that, you've got the lovely crests of all the families who lived here from the 12th century right up to 1953. All of the other artifacts in this room, St. Martin the Taurus, Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac, St. Hubert, the patron saint of hunting, and so on, from his canonization. And this piece over here would be my favorite piece of the whole collection. Of all the pieces I've seen in the collection, this has got the most mystery attached to it, in my opinion, of course. It's from the 14th century. It's of St. Peter on the throne of Rome holding the keys to the kingdom of heaven. It's surrounded by 21 karat gold leaf. It's absolutely beautiful embroidered around it and all the architriving and so on. The thing that makes it very strange though is that it's painted onto wood, and it's the 14th century. Now we all know that wood over time dries out and cracks and so on. There's not one blemish on that piece, and it has never been restored. I don't know why, I can't make any sense of it, but I just love to think of, in my own mind, the religious aspect to it and so on. It's quite exquisite, as all these pieces are in the castle that we have. There's over 900 pieces in this collection, and they're all exquisite. Now, ladies and gentlemen, some of the things you might see up on the walls up here, the little damp pieces that you see, even though it was Christendom, they still believed in pagan gods to ward off evil spirits and to basically encourage fertility and to basically bring peace and harmony to the environment. And most of these symbols were found in this home here. They were found behind the plaster, but they would have been found in most stately homes at the time, most castles and so on, even though it was Christendom. One of the strangest pieces we found was behind the priest's quarters, in behind the plasterwork when we were actually renovating it. It's called the Shield and the Gig. It's a stone piece that basically it aids fertility. And the idea being if you sat near it or if you touched it, that you would become fertile. Now there's only 75 known pieces left to exist in our world today, in our world. And we put it over here in the place of reverence. It's in the middle of the wall. It's a square, it's a little triangular piece of a woman giving birth, and she's wearing a scary mask. So that is one of the most exquisite pieces in our collection. It is from the 4th and 5th century. So you can appreciate that's pagan times, not Christian times. Now the 4 towers we have, ladies and gentlemen, tower number 1 over here goes up 20 steps to the living quarters of the Earl, his family and so on. You come across then the living quarters. We have a table in the middle there that was found in the late 16th century. It's a table that came from a galleon from the Spanish Armada. It's quite exquisite. It's beautiful indeed. Coming down the 20 steps, you also have an option of going another 40 steps up to the outside to see around the castle, as you can see. Please be careful of the staircases going up and down. There's all handrails on them, but just please mind yourself. This one is a separate tower in itself, going up 60 steps and coming down 60 steps. The chaplain's quarters, the chapel, the princess's quarters, and outside you will see a view that you will not see anywhere else. It's 60 miles away, the Shannon on the right, the marshlands on the left. If an army was coming to invade, it's from that location that they would see it. That soldiers will be living up there every hour of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year. So they would be up there 24 hours a day. And they would hopefully get about 3 days notice of an army once they saw an army and moving fast to actually lay siege here. It would take maybe 3 or 4 days to get all of the provisions in and all the army, and to basically for the Earl to send out word to all of his battalions to actually converge on this location. So it's from this location here. And if you go up to the top of that tower, you'll see very little has changed from the medieval times. Limerick is only a little bit in the distance there. Over here, Lady Gordon and Lord Gordon, they lived here in the 1960s. They converted this tower here to their own liking. And Lady Gordon was an amazing woman. Not only was she a very good architect, but also she had amazing style. And she converted this, for her love of the medieval world, she converted this tower to her own way and to her own liking. And the ceiling up there is quite exquisite. And the surroundings there are quite beautiful as well. Thank you very much for listening to me. God bless you all. Safe journey onward. And thank you for coming to see us in Bunratty Park.